Walter Briggs was 82 years old, and he had a rule about mornings. Coffee first, everything else second. He had kept that rule through two knee replacements, a mild stroke in 2021 that left his left hand slightly slower than his right, and the death of his wife Ruth 3 years ago. He kept it now, on a gray Tuesday in March, even after he noticed the cream-colored envelope sitting on the kitchen table, the one with the Heartland First Bank return address printed in cold blue letters. He made his coffee. He sat by the window. He watched the bare oak tree in the front yard sway in the wind. Ruth had always said that tree was his twin, stubborn, thick-skinned, and impossible to remove. Then he opened the letter. 3 pages, dense with language built to confuse. He found the number buried in the second paragraph, $25,000. The bank claimed he was delinquent on the final years of his home equity loan and was initiating legal proceedings to recover the outstanding balance. There was a court date. There was a case number. There was, at the bottom, the signature of a bank attorney Walter had never heard of. He read it twice. Then he sat on the table, finished his coffee, and went to find his green ledger. Hit the subscribe button and make my day, and where are you watching from, and comment. The ledger lived in the second kitchen drawer, wedged between a box of rubber bands and a packet of birthday candles Ruth had bought years ago and never used. It was a simple thing, green vinyl cover, college ruled pages, the kind sold 3 for $1 at the pharmacy. But inside it was something the bank had apparently never expected. 11 years of perfect records. Every payment, every date, every check number, written in Walter's careful, deliberate hand. The handwriting of a man who had once been a school teacher before he took over his father's hardware store, and who believed that a thing worth doing was worth documenting. $318, January 1st, 2014. Check number 1042. $318, February 1st, 2014. Check number 1059. Page after page, month after month. He carried the ledger to the kitchen table, set it next to the bank's letter, and began to compare. The bank was claiming he had missed payments and accumulated penalties. His ledger said otherwise. The question was, what had happened in the space between his payments going out and the bank's records? He didn't know the answer yet. But Walter Briggs had not survived 82 years by walking away from a question he didn't have the answer to. He went to the bedroom closet and began pulling out shoeboxes. Ruth had called them his paper museum. Carol, his daughter, had a more diplomatic term, Dad's filing system. Whatever you called it, Walter had kept every bank statement, every payment confirmation, every piece of correspondence related to the home equity loan since the day he'd signed the papers in 2013. There were 11 shoeboxes in total. He carried them out 2 at a time, stacking them along the kitchen wall until the room felt like a small archive. Then he called his neighbor's son Danny, 26 years old, patient, and between jobs, and asked if he'd come help sort them. Danny arrived within the hour. They worked across the kitchen table, oldest to newest, separating statement from confirmations from notices. Walter's knees ached from sitting on the floor during the first pass. Danny made them both sandwiches around noon. They didn't talk much. Walter was never a man who talked when he was thinking, and Danny had learned that about him. By the end of the second day, they had 11 years of documents laid out in chronological order. 11 years of a man doing exactly what he was supposed to do, paying his debt, on time, every month without complaint. Somewhere in those pages was the discrepancy the bank was hiding behind. Walter was going to find it. He found it on the afternoon of the third day, March 2019. A bank statement that looked at a glance like all the others. But Walter had his magnifying glass, a concession to age he had reluctantly accepted 2 years ago, and he used it now, moving slowly down the column of transactions. There, a line item he had never noticed before, never questioned, never understood. PROC correction FEE 35.00. No explanation. No accompanying letter. No documentation of what was being corrected or why. Just a $35 charge, quietly inserted into his account on March 7th, 2019, as if it had always belonged there. He stared at it for a long time. Then he went back to his ledger. His March 2019 payment had gone out on March 1st, as always. Check number 1378. $318. He had the canceled check in his shoebox. He'd kept those too. The check had cleared his personal bank on March 4th. But according to the bank statement, his March 2019 payment had been applied to an account number that was not his. One digit off. The payment had landed in a stranger's account, or more likely, in an institutional void, and simply sat there, uncorrected. And then, instead of fixing the error and moving on, someone at Heartland First had added a $35 processing correction fee to Walter's account, a fee for their own mistake. And from that $35, from that one small, undisclosed, unjustified charge, 6 years of interest calculations had been running wrong. The number seemed almost insulting. $35. Less than a tank of gas. Less than a good dinner for two. In the context of a $25,000 lawsuit against an 82-year-old man, $35 was almost laughable. Except it wasn't. Walter sat at his kitchen table that evening and worked through the math slowly, the way he used to work through problems on the blackboard when he taught 7th grade arithmetic. He wasn't a financial analyst, but he understood compound interest the way any man of his generation did, as something that worked for you when you had savings and against you when you had debt. The unauthorized $35 fee had altered his outstanding balance in March 2019. That altered balance had changed the split between principal and interest on every subsequent payment. Month after month, his $318 was being applied slightly wrong. A few extra cents going to interest, a few fewer cents reducing the principal. Over 6 years, those tiny miscalculations had compounded. What the bank had done, functionally, was use their own bookkeeping error to inflate what he owed, and then, when the numbers finally looked alarming enough, they had hired a lawyer. They had built a $25,000 lawsuit on a $35 lie. Walter folded his hands on the table and stared at the March 2019 statement for a long time. He thought about Ruth, who had fretted about the loan when they first took it out. He thought about Carol, who had used part of the money for her cancer treatment. He thought about this house, the oak tree outside, the 51 years of living he had done within these walls. Then he picked up the phone and called his daughter. Carol Briggs Meadows was 54 years old, 3 years cancer-free, and the kind of woman who responded to a crisis by making a list. When Walter told her what he had found, she was quiet on the phone for exactly 4 seconds. He counted, and then she said, "Dad, don't touch anything on that table. I'll be there Saturday." She drove 3 hours from Columbus. She arrived with a rolling suitcase, a laptop, and a container of the lentil soup she knew he liked. They spent Saturday going through everything together. Carol photographed every document with her phone. She made a spreadsheet. Walter watched over her shoulder, quietly impressed by how fast her fingers moved across the keyboard. By Saturday evening, they had a complete timeline. Every payment, every statement, every discrepancy traced back to the single $35 entry in March 2019. "This is fraud, Dad," Carol said quietly, looking at the screen. I don't know what it is yet, Walter said. I know what it looks like. We need a lawyer. I know, a good one. Not just anyone. Walter nodded. He looked out at the oak tree, dark now against the evening sky. You said you had a friend who knew someone. A woman on Elm Street. Carol looked at him. You remembered that? I remember everything, he said, just slower than I used to. The office of Margaret O'Say, attorney at law, was on the second floor of a narrow brick building above a hardware store on Elm Street. The stairs were steep, and Walter took them slowly, one hand on the rail. Carol walked behind him without comment. Margaret O'Say was 60 years old, with close-cropped silver hair, reading glasses on a beaded chain, and a desk covered in neatly organized stacks of paper that somehow only she could navigate. She had practiced consumer protection law for 31 years. She had gone up against banks, debt collectors, insurance companies, and mortgage servicers. She had a particular dislike for large institutions that used legal machinery to intimidate people who didn't know their rights. Walter spread his documents across her desk and talked for 20 minutes. Margaret listened without interrupting. She made occasional notes. When he finished, she sat back in her chair and tapped her pen against her notepad. A habit, Carol would later say, that meant she was thinking hard. Mr. Briggs, she said at last, are you familiar with the Truth in Lending Act? No, Walter said. Are you familiar with the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act? No. Margaret almost smiled. You're about to be. Margaret O'Say explained it the way good lawyers explain things, in plain English, without condescension, and without skipping the parts that matter. The Truth in Lending Act, TILA, she called it, requires lenders to clearly disclose all fees to borrowers. An undisclosed $35 processing correction fee applied to a loan account without notice, without documentation, and without the borrower's knowledge or consent is a potential federal violation. Not a technicality, a violation. The misapplied payment, Walter's March 2019 check routed to the wrong account number, compounded the problem. Federal servicing rules require lenders to properly apply payments and to correct errors promptly. The bank had done neither. Instead, they had quietly charged Walter for their own mistake and moved on. The downstream effect, 6 years of slightly incorrect interest calculations leading to an inflated balance, meant the $25,000 the bank was suing him for was not a legitimate debt. It was a number produced by their own error, amplified by time, and presented to a court as fact. They were counting on you not having these records, Margaret said. People my age usually don't, Walter acknowledged. No, they usually don't. She tapped her pen once, firmly, which is exactly why banks do this. She paused, then added, Mr. Briggs, I want to take your case. I don't think this is going to trial, but I want to be ready if it does. Walter looked at Carol. Carol gave a small nod. All right, Walter said. Let's be ready. The next 4 weeks were the busiest Walter had been in years. Margaret needed certified copies of everything. Danny helped him scan every document. All 132 monthly statements, all 132 canceled checks, every piece of correspondence from the bank going back to 2013. Carol drove up twice more to help organize the digital files. Margaret sent the bank a formal written response to the lawsuit, along with a demand letter under the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act, a request for full debt validation, a complete payment history, and documentation justifying the March 2019 processing correction fee. The bank's attorneys took 3 weeks to respond. When they did, their documentation of the $35 fee was thin a one-line internal notation that said only account correction. No customer notification. No disclosure. No explanation of what had been corrected or why Walter should bear the cost of it. Margaret called Walter on a Wednesday evening. He was in the kitchen eating dinner alone, as he did most evenings. "They can't justify the fee," she said. "They know it. We know it. The question now is whether they'll withdraw or try to brazen it out in court." "What do you think they'll do?" Walter asked. "I think they'll want to settle quietly. Banks don't like it when their internal records get read aloud in a courtroom." "And if they don't settle?" Margaret was quiet for a moment. "Then we read their records aloud in a courtroom." Walter took a sip of his coffee. "Fine by me," he said. The hearing was scheduled for a Thursday in May. Walter ironed his blue jacket the night before, the one he'd worn to Ruth's funeral and to Carol's wedding and to his retirement dinner from the hardware store. It was old, but it was good fabric and it still fit. Carol had offered to stay the night. He told her she didn't need to. She came anyway, sleeping in the guest room that still had her old swimming ribbons tacked above the dresser. He couldn't sleep, not from anxiety, exactly. He wasn't afraid of the courtroom. He'd testified in a property dispute once, 30 years ago, and had found the whole proceeding far less intimidating than people made it out to be. What he felt now was something closer to patience stretched thin, the feeling of waiting for a thing that should have been resolved long ago to finally reach its end. He made tea at 2 in the morning and sat in the kitchen in the dark. He could hear the oak tree moving in the wind outside, the same deep creak it had made for 40 years. He thought about Ruth, about how she had worried about money sometimes, not obsessively, not cripplingly, but in the quiet way of a woman who had grown up without enough of it and never quite forgot what that felt like. He had always tried to protect her from those worries. He was still trying, in a way. "Almost done," he said quietly, to no one in particular. The oak tree creaked. He finished his tea and went back to bed. The courtroom was smaller than Walter expected. Fluorescent lights, brown carpet, 2 long tables facing a raised bench, with a low wooden railing between the public seats and the proceedings. He had imagined something grander, marble, maybe, or at least better light. This room felt more like a mid-level conference room than a place where people's lives were decided. The bank's attorney was a man named Clifford Hayne. He was perhaps 40, dressed in a dark suit that had probably cost more than Walter's first car, and he carried himself with the easy confidence of someone who rarely lost. He shook Margaret's hand with professional courtesy and ignored Walter entirely. Walter noticed that. He didn't mind. The judge was a woman named the Honorable Patricia Suarez. She was compact and silver-haired and had the quality, Walter thought, of a person who had heard every possible variation of human foolishness and was no longer surprised by any of it. She called the room to order with no ceremony and asked the bank's attorney to present his case. Clifford Hayne presented the $25,000 as a simple matter of accumulated debt. He cited the bank's internal records. He cited the outstanding balance. He described Walter, without naming him directly, as a borrower who had failed to meet his obligations. He spoke for 11 minutes. He did not mention March 2019. He did not mention the $35 fee. Then it was Margaret Osei's turn. Margaret Osei stood, smoothed her jacket, and introduced the evidence. Exhibit A, Walter's Green Ledger. 132 entries. 132 on-time payments. The dates, the amounts, the check numbers, all matching, all verified. Exhibit B, 132 canceled checks. Every payment Walter had ever made on the loan, physically present in the courtroom, organized in chronological order in a banker's box. Exhibit C. The March 2019 bank statement, enlarged on a display board, with a line item highlighted in yellow. PROC correction FE 35.00. Margaret explained, slowly, clearly, in terms no one in the room could misunderstand. What that fee was, where it had come from, what the bank could not explain about it, and what it had done to Walter's loan account over the 6 years since it appeared. Exhibit D. An independent financial analysis prepared by a certified accountant showing the correct loan balance when the unauthorized fee was removed and the misapplied March 2019 payment was properly applied. The correct balance was not $25,000. It was not $10,000. It was not $1,000. It was zero. Walter Briggs was current on his loan. He had been current for 11 years. The bank had made an error, charged him for it, and then sued him based on the downstream consequences of their own mistake. Clifford Hayne asked for a recess. Judge Suarez granted him 20 minutes. The bank withdrew the lawsuit. It was almost anticlimactic, the way Clifford Hayne presented it when the recess ended. A careful, lawyerly statement about a mutual desire to resolve the matter without further proceedings. He did not use the word error. He did not use the word mistake. He certainly did not use the word fraud. Judge Patricia Suarez was not interested in careful, lawyerly language. She had read the exhibits during the recess. She had looked at the March 2019 statement. She had looked at the financial analysis. She had looked at Walter Briggs's 11 years of impeccable payment records, sitting in a banker's box in her courtroom. She noted, on the record, that the bank had initiated legal proceedings against a borrower without auditing the accuracy of the debt they claimed was owed. She noted the undisclosed fee. She noted the misapplied payment. She ordered the bank to correct Walter's credit report within 30 days, to issue written confirmation that the loan was satisfied in full and in good standing, and to reimburse Walter's complete legal costs. Clifford Hayne accepted the order without expression. He gathered his papers, shook no one's hand, and left. Margaret turned to Walter and said quietly, "That's it." Walter nodded. He looked at Carol, who was pressing her fingers against the corners of her eyes and pretending she wasn't. He put his hand over hers for a moment. They drove home on a May afternoon, the kind where the light comes through newly leafed trees and long golden bars, and the whole world smells like grass and warm pavement. Walter didn't say much on the drive. He was thinking about the oak tree, how it would look now in the afternoon light in full spring leaf. He was thinking that he had planted it the year he and Ruth moved in 51 years ago, and that it was still there, and so was he. Some things endure because they are built well. Some things endure because someone refuses to stop paying attention. Walter Briggs had built his ledger entry by entry, month by month, year after year, with no audience and no reward, because he believed that the truth of what you did and what you paid and what you owed was worth writing down. At 82, those green pages had saved his house, cleared his name, and sent a bank's attorneys home empty-handed. He got out of the car, walked to his front door, and looked back at the oak tree standing broad and patient in the afternoon light. Almost done, he had said the night before. He was done now.